Did you know that Cancer serial killers with Moon in Aries often target strangers? One killed with a brick, another desecrated a body, one stalked his victims for days, and another demanded the death penalty. One was driven to crime by jealousy of a photographer's ideal life, while another nearly escaped capture, if not for a broken foot. Yet one case remains shadowed by racial injustice, leaving doubt as to whether the right killer was caught. Keep watching to uncover the chilling details of these cases. When we think about Cancer, one of the first things that might come to mind is the protective and nurturing qualities associated with this water sign. Represented by the crab, Cancer is known for its deep emotional nature, its desire for safety, and its strong attachment to family and home. People born under this sign are often seen as sensitive, intuitive, and highly attuned to their environments. But what happens when this emotional energy becomes unbalanced or driven by darker impulses? In the world of astrology, the moon represents our emotional core, how we feel, react, and process the world on an instinctive level, while Cancer is the ruler of the moon, which usually creates a harmonious connection. The combination of Cancer Sun and Aries Moon creates a more volatile mix. The moon in Aries is fiery, impulsive, and often seeks immediate satisfaction. Aries, ruled by Mars, the planet of war and aggression, brings a competitive, impulsive, and reckless energy to the emotional realm. Now imagine that inner conflict, Cancer's deep need for emotional security colliding with Aries' impatient drive for action. Cancer wants to feel safe and secure, but Moon in Aries urges immediate, often aggressive responses when that sense of security is threatened. In these individuals, emotions can become explosive. The nurturing qualities of Cancer can be overshadowed by a desire for dominance, control, or, in extreme cases, violence. The need for emotional satisfaction can lead to sudden, impulsive acts of aggression, especially when combined with a volatile personal history or traumatic background. As we explore stories of these Cancer Sun Moon in Aries serial killers, we'll see how this astrological combination plays out in different ways, from impulsive violence to strategic manipulation. Each case is unique, but the patterns of emotional volatility, impulsive actions, and a desire for dominance or recognition will emerge as common threads. Keep these traits in mind as we delve into their crimes and see how astrology offers a unique lens through which to understand their behavior. Leonard Fraser, nicknamed the Rockhampton Rapist, was an Australian serial killer whose crimes remain deeply unsettling. His targets were women, spanning a wide age range from young girls to adults, and his killing spree went largely unnoticed for years. Leonard was born in Queensland on June 27, 1951. He was the second youngest of 4 children, but it seems that he didn't have a particularly good relationship with his siblings. He later said that he would be glad he never saw his brothers and sisters again. It's not only that he hated his siblings, but he also hated both of his parents, though we don't know exactly why. Is it because of something they did, or was it solely because of Leonard's subjective perception of them? We may never know. As a child, he engaged in one of the 3 commonly observed behaviors that indicate that the individual may become a violent criminal in the future. Leonard engaged in hurting animals, but we don't know if he exhibited the other 2 behaviors of the McDonald triad: bedwetting and fire starting. As you know, the less notoriety a criminal has created, either globally or locally, the less information we'll have on their backgrounds and the details from their life that are not connected to the murders. Leonard wasn't really good at school and finally dropped out. Like many serial killers on my list, Fraser had an extensive criminal record before the first killings. It dated back to 1966, when he was sentenced to 12 months in a boys' home for stealing. He was 15 at the time. He spent the following years in and out of jail for theft and various other crimes, including assault. And as you know, when I say assault, I don't mean just physical assault. He even once attacked a woman in a laundry room, similar to one Gemini serial killer with Moon in Virgo, Miroslav Stangler, whose case we compared to other Gemini Sun Virgo Moon serial killers, and you should definitely check it out. I'll leave the link in the description box. Now, Leonard Fraser embodied a volatile mix of emotional detachment and impulsive aggression. Even before his killing spree began, a court psychiatrist deemed him beyond redemption, describing him as someone without a conscience, driven only by self-interest with little regard for others. His actions were marked by a lack of impulse control control, and he was known to manipulate and use anyone or anything to his advantage. In prison, after serving 12 years for assault, his unpredictable outbursts earned him the nickname Lanny the Loon. His violent tendencies, seemingly erupting without reason, foreshadow the cold-blooded brutality that will later define his deadly path. His first known murder occurred in 1998 when Fraser was 47. That is significantly older than most killers who usually begin in their early 20s. However, Fraser had claimed that he killed his girlfriend back in the 70s, and if true, it would place him in line with majority of killers. Fraser's method was brutal. He would approach a woman from behind, twist her arm behind her back, making it nearly impossible for her to defend herself. He would then abduct, assault, and strangle his victims. His targets were female strangers ranging in age from 9 to 39. At one point, he stalked a 21-year-old woman for several days as she took her daily walks along the beach. Stalking generally falls into two categories: delusional and non-delusional. Delusional stalking involves the stalker believing that they have a much deeper connection with the victim than they actually have. This is often seen in cases where individuals obsessed over celebrities, convinced that the celebrity is sending them secret signals through media, leading them to believe that they are in a relationship despite having never met. However, this type of stalking isn't limited to just fans of celebrities. It can occur whenever someone is under the false belief that their relationship with the victim is more significant than it really is. Now, in Fraser's case, his stalking appeared to be non-delusional. One of his more bizarre actions occurred during an attack where Fraser entered a woman's house. She somehow managed to persuade him to call her husband. Fraser took the phone and, instead of remaining silent, told the man he hoped he wouldn't kill him. His reasoning? Fraser claimed he was only trying to prove a point, that someone could break in and brutally assault his wife. This shows how powerful and untouchable he felt, believing he could toy with others' lives at will. What's also revealing is that Fraser communicated with his victims, something many killers shy away from, often due to insecurities in their ability to interact with others. Leonard Fraser lived in a deep state of delusion. He believed that his poor victims actually enjoyed being assaulted by him. Now, believe it or not, this is not uncommon for perpetrators like him. Some do actually believe that their victims enjoy the forceful intercourse when it's clear that they're suffering. Whether the perpetrators truly believe that this is true, or they're just trying to persuade themselves into believing that they aren't doing anything bad, is another question. Fraser, like many serial killers, had a chilling habit of keeping trophies, a twisted way of reliving his crimes. In his case, he collected the ponytails of his victims, a macabre keepsake that connected him to his atrocities long after the murders were committed. While trophy keeping is often associated with serial killers in popular culture, the truth is that only a small percentage actually engage in this ritual. Yet for Fraser, it was a part of his grim routine. Among the Cancer serial killers with Moon in Aries, Fraser stood out as the only one who indulged in this dark behavior, making his actions even more disturbing and personal. He usually snatched victims from the streets in broad daylight, which also says a lot about how brazen he was. What finally led to his capture was not a grand manhunt or a slip in his methods, but the grim discovery of shallow graves containing the remains of some of his victims. DNA evidence linked him to the crimes, but what stood out were the circumstances of the killings. Fraser, in an attempt to secure his own comfort in prison, initially confessed to 5 murders, hoping to strike a deal with the police that would keep him out of the general prison population. His confession seemed to be credible enough, but what happened next was something no one saw coming. One of the victims he claimed to have killed, a 14-year-old girl named Natasha Ryan, wasn't dead at all. In fact, she had been alive the whole time, secretly living with a boyfriend in a nearby town. Natasha had been missing for 5 years, and Fraser's false confession unraveled an entirely different truth, casting doubt on his reliability. Yet, despite the shocking revelation, Fraser continued his manipulative game, leading police to the remains of another victim, proving that while he may have lied about Natasha, his hands were still stained with blood. And as for those trophies, they didn't match any of his known victims, raising disturbing questions about just how many other women and girls he may have hurt or killed. Finally, Fraser was sentenced to 3 indefinite prison terms. He died of heart attack in prison on January 1st, 2007. He was 55 years old. Viktor Malyuk, a Russian serial killer driven by envy and greed, was born on July 5th, 1961. Due to the lack of notoriety surrounding his crimes, little is known about his childhood. After graduating, Malyuk briefly attended Forestry College, but quickly realized it wasn't the path he wanted to pursue. He viewed himself as highly talented, dabbled in music, and even directed the amateur theater ensemble at the Yukta Palace of Culture. Believing that his potential was wasted in the provinces, Malyuk moved to Moscow in 1999, hoping to join a popular band, tour, and make a living. Unfortunately, he faced rejection at every turn and soon ran out of money. To support himself, Malyuk began buying and selling household appliances and electronics, which he repaired and resold for profit. Even when committing crimes, this was his main source of income. When Malyuk realized his dreams of joining a musical group were out of reach, he sank into a deep depression. This shift in mindset is something often seen in individuals who later turn to violence. Initially, killing is not their plan, but after repeated failures in life, they start believing that the only way to assert themselves or gain recognition is through murder. It's not just about the desire for control over another person and deciding their fate, it's the allure of notoriety. They crave the attention, the police hunts, the media coverage of their crimes, and the fear their names evoke in the public. Malyuk's descent into murder began almost by accident. His first victim was a photographer, Maxim Fadden, who Malyuk wanted to purchase a camera from. Initially, there was no intention to kill. However, as Fadden began sharing stories about his wonderful life, his success, and his happiness, something snapped in Malyuk. The envy that had been building inside him for years took over, and his feelings of inadequacy were magnified in the presence of Fadden's achievements. In a fit of rage, Malyuk shot him 3 times. Fadden managed to stumble out of his car, desperately trying to escape, but ultimately collapsed and died on the spot. The murder wasn't premeditated, but it ignited the darker impulses that had been brewing inside Malyuk for years. But did it stop there? Of course not, but here's why. After reviewing a criminal chronicle, Malyuk was satisfied that he was finally in the spotlight. In May 2001, while looking through newspaper advertisements, the killer drew attention to the article Sentenced to an Armchair, which talked about the problems of a pensioner, Galina Lebedeva, who was not given due attention by her guardian. On May 29, 2001, Malyuk came to Lebedeva, introduced himself as her new guardian, ordered an expensive laptop from a computer company, and killed the company's courier, Alexander Kolesnikov, who came to Lebedeva's address and then shot Lebedeva. The more attention his gruesome crimes garnered, the more Malyuk's sense of self-worth swelled. Finally, he wasn't just a nobody, a failure. He was somebody people feared, someone who commanded attention. Malyuk's next victim was 37-year-old trader Viktor Gusev. On September 7, 2001, Malyuk responded to an ad about purchasing a laptop, arranged a meeting with Gusev, and after completing the deal, he ruthlessly shot him 6 times in the elevator. His loot, $950 American. His primary motive appeared to be the sense of control and dominance he gained from his horrific actions. Interestingly, his crimes fell into both organized and disorganized categories. The first murder was disorganized since he didn't initially plan to kill the photographer during their meeting, although he did suspiciously have a gun with him. Coincidence? That's up to you to decide. Malyuk thought he was outsmarting everyone by frequently swapping out SIM cards while contacting potential victims. However, he overlooked the fact that he used the same mobile phone every time, allowing authorities to trace him via the device's unique IMEI number. On March 12, 2002, Malyuk had meticulously planned his 5th murder, targeting Alexander Garnetz, a man selling a laptop. Growing bolder with each time, Malyuk responded under the alias Yuri, confident he would carry out another killing and disappear without a trace. What he didn't realize, however, was that investigators had been tracking him all along using the unique IMEI number of his phone, not the SIM cards he had been changing. Unbeknownst to Malyuk, the police were already laying a trap. The detectives warned Garnetz of the danger, instructing him to play along. Garnetz, though shaken, followed their plan, delaying the meeting by 3 hours with a plausible excuse. Malyuk, oblivious to the setup, agreed without hesitation. The delay gave police time to secure the location, preparing for his capture. When Malyuk arrived at Garnett's apartment, gun hidden in his coat, he was met not by a helpless victim but by waiting officers who swiftly arrested him, ending his killing spree. Since Malyuk took money or possessions from his victims, his actions can also be classified under criminal enterprise. Anytime financial gain is a primary or secondary motive, whether through felony murder like in Malyuk's case, or through collecting insurance policies, we classify it as criminal enterprise. If you're interested in exploring this further, check out my video on Aries serial killers with Moon in Aries, which delves into the same type of motivation. And you might even find some intriguing similarities between Aries killers with Moon in Aries and Cancer killers with Moon in Aries. And let me know what connections you've discovered. So Viktor Malyuk was ultimately charged with 4 murders, yet throughout the investigation and trial, he refused to admit any guilt. Even as the evidence mounted against him, Malyuk remained defiant, submitting numerous complaints to various authorities in a futile attempt to cast doubt on the proceedings. Despite his efforts, a forensic psychiatric examination concluded that he was fully sane and entirely aware of his actions, leaving little room for him to claim otherwise. On December 26, 2003, the Moscow City Court sentenced Malyuk to life imprisonment. This case was particularly significant because since the introduction of jury trials in Moscow, it was the first time that all jurors were unanimous in their agreement with the prosecution's version of events. Malyuk's attempt to manipulate the narrative had failed, and his fate was sealed by a jury who saw through his lies. Even after the trial, Malyuk's story wasn't quite finished. In the spring of 2004, the Supreme Court of Russia reviewed his case and chose to uphold the original verdict, reaffirming the life sentence. Despite his relentless denial and refusal to cooperate, Viktor Malyuk was destined to spend the rest of his life behind bars, his crime finally catching up with him. However, on August 4, 2004, the day before being sent to a colony, Viktor Malyuk took his own life. He was 43 years old. The following case is somewhat controversial, potentially influenced by racial injustices. I say potentially because we can definitely claim the accused was innocent. It's important to approach these cases cautiously for two reasons. First, there's a chance he was wrongfully convicted, and second, there's a real possibility he was guilty. In this video, we'll present the details as they occurred and explore any patterns with other cases in this group, but we won't be making any conclusions about whether the police apprehended the correct person. Robert Nixon, also known as the Brick Moron, was a young African-American who was accused, convicted, and executed for the murders of at least 3 white women and girls, ranging in age from 12 to 48. Born on July 19, 1919, into a poor African-American family, little is known about Robert's early life, as is often the case. This makes it difficult to assess how his Cancer Sun-Aries Moon combination may have shaped his upbringing, regardless of whether or not he was the true perpetrator. Astrology offers valuable insights into a person's life, behavior, and emotional and mental processes, which is why even those who commit serious crimes can share certain traits with law-abiding individuals. Before Robert Nixon became embroiled in one of the most controversial murder cases of his time, he had lived a difficult life, surviving the streets of Los Angeles through petty crime. With arrests for shoplifting, purse snatching, and suspicions of auto theft, Nixon's name was already linked to a life of trouble. But was he the real perpetrator of these gruesome crimes, or was he framed? Let's continue. The first murder took place on a quiet night, March 2, 1937, when a young 20-year-old mother was found brutally assaulted and murdered in her own home. The crime scene was particularly chilling, as her infant child lay sound asleep in the crib just feet away, completely unaware of the horror that had unfolded nearby. The murder weapon, a simple brick, was left at the scene, a disturbing symbol of a senseless violence that had claimed her life. Just over a month later, on April 4, 1937, the city was rocked by another gruesome crime. This time, the victims were a 48-year-old woman and her 12-year-old daughter, both brutally attacked and killed in their apartment. Once again, a brick was found at the scene used to carry out the savage attack. The similarities between the two cases quickly drew the attention of detectives. The brutality of the assaults, combined with a distinctive choice of weapon, common brick, connected the two incidents in their minds. The bricks are everyday objects. Their use in such horrific crimes was anything but ordinary. Investigators began to suspect that a single individual was responsible for these brutal killings, a killer whose weapon of choice was something as unassuming as a brick, leaving a trail of violence and fear throughout the community. As detectives dug deeper, they were faced with the unsettling possibility that more such crimes could follow, pushing them to work tirelessly to track down the person responsible. Yet the city's fear and confusion only grew as they grappled with the horrific reality that a seemingly ordinary object had become a tool of death in the hands of a ruthless murderer. As the investigation into the brutal brick murders deepened, the authorities began to notice a disturbing pattern. On January 25th, a woman was violently assaulted by an African-American man wielding a brick at Monte San Hospital. The attack, though terrifying, left the victim alive but deeply shaken. Just over a week later, on February 3rd, another woman suffered a similar fate when a black assailant fractured her skull with a brick in the confines of her hotel room. These attacks, eerily similar in nature, echoed the brutal force used in the earlier murders. Then, on March 28th, a third woman was attacked in her own home, nearly losing her life. She was assaulted by an African-American man, again using a brick as a weapon of choice. This attack stood out, as the description of her assailant matched the profile of a man seen lurking near the home of one of the murder victims just before her death. These assaults, all involving a brick as a weapon, began to create a grim connection. It was now becoming clear to investigators that these attacks weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a broader, more calculated pattern of violence. The common thread linking these cases together wasn't just the use of brick, but a description of the assailant. Authorities began to wonder if the same man responsible for the earlier murders was now expanding his reach, spreading terror with each new assault. Detectives faced mounting pressure to find and stop the person responsible before he could strike again. So what role does Robert Nixon play in all of this? We already know he was no stranger to petty crime, but when he returned to Chicago from LA, another brick murder occurred. Was it merely a coincidence? What do you think? On May 27, 1938, another tragic murder took place, this time involving a woman who had been brutally attacked with multiple blows to the head using a brick as she desperately fought off burglars. The violence of the crime shocked the community, but a key witness emerged, her sister, who shared the apartment and had been asleep in another room during the attack. She awoke just in time to see two assailants fleeing the scene, which provided a crucial lead for the investigators. This eyewitness account, combined with discovery of blood on his clothes and scratches on his hands, led to the arrest of Robert Nixon. The Nixon's involvement remained questionable. The physical evidence and timing of his capture further entangled him in a growing web of suspicion surrounding the string of brick-related murders. Initially, Robert Nixon attempted to shift the blame for the murder of Mrs. Johnson onto his accomplice, 19-year-old Earl Hicks. According to Nixon, the murder occurred while the two were in the midst of burglarizing Johnson's apartment, and it was Hicks who was responsible for the fatal blows. However, Hicks, who had also been arrested, told a very different story. He placed the full responsibility for Johnson's murder on Nixon, claiming it was Nixon who had struck her after she awoke during the burglary and began screaming. Hicks insisted that Nixon had acted out of panic in effort to silence her, escalated what had started as a break-in into a brutal and tragic murder. The conflicting accounts between Nixon and Hicks created a tangled web of accusations, leaving authorities to piece together the truth of what had transpired at night. Nixon's situation became more complicated when his fingerprints were found at the crime scene, linking him to the murder. Confronted with this evidence, Nixon admitted to writing the message found on the mirror at the crime scene. However, the full extent of his role in the crime remained unclear, as both Nixon and Hicks had offered conflicting accounts, leaving doubts about who was truly responsible. The fingerprint evidence raised questions, but the truth of what had occurred was still a matter of uncertainty. Robert Nixon was convicted of one murder and sentenced to death. He was executed on June 16, 1939. He was 19 at the time of his death. Probably the most notorious figure in Cancer Sun-Aries Moon group is Anthony Allen Shore, also known as the Tourniquet Killer, who was born in the United States on June 25, 1962. Because his case did gain a higher level of infamy, we'll have more information on his childhood and details from his personal life. Anthony Allen Shore's childhood was marked by constant upheaval, with his family frequently relocating to major cities. The lack of stability made it nearly impossible for him to form lasting friendships, leaving him isolated as they moved from place to place. Beneath the surface, his home life was unraveling. His parents began engaging in extramarital affairs, signaling a deeper fracture in the family. At the age of 15, Shore experienced what he would later refer to as the big event, a moment he claimed changed everything. One day in 1977, instead of his mother, it was his father who picked him up from school. To Shore, this was a pivotal moment, one that signaled his mother's growing detachment and the shift that he believed would mean she would stop bothering him. Despite their personal flaws, neither of his parents struggled with alcoholism, yet their relationship became increasingly volatile, especially after the birth of his younger sister Laurel. Her arrival seemed to ignite a new level of tension in the household as arguments between his parents escalated, leaving a deep impression on the young Anthony. Anthony Allen Shore later claimed that his mother began crossing disturbing boundaries when he was in puberty. Following his parents' divorce, his mother remarried, but this new chapter of her life only deepened Shore's resentment. He struggled with his feelings towards his new stepfather, further straining an already difficult family dynamic. Anthony Allen Shore displayed two of the three behaviors commonly linked to the future violent tendencies known as the McDonald Triad. As a child, he was known to harm animals and struggled with persistent bedwetting, both concerning signs. However, he did not exhibit a third behavior often seen in such cases, starting fires. These early warning signs painted a troubling picture of the young Shore, hinting at the darker path he would later follow. Shore's troubling behavior began to surface early in his childhood. In one alarming incident, he used a screwdriver to harm his sister, a clear sign of his growing aggression. By the time he was 16, his disturbing tendencies escalated as he began stalking and harassing girls he found attractive, marking the beginning of a dangerous pattern of behavior. When Shore's family relocated to Alabama, his struggles only deepened. He quickly became the school's whipping boy, constantly picked on and described by those around him as being perpetually afraid and mad. His performance in school was poor, and by the age of 17, he dropped out entirely. Shore tried his hands at various jobs, construction work, towing, and even music, but his inability to hold down steady employment led to him being fired from several positions. At 22, Anthony entered in his first marriage with Gina and Morley. For nearly a decade, they built a life together, but when Anthony turned 31, he confessed to Gina that he had been having an affair. This revelation led him to leave his family, marking the end of their marriage. A year later, at 32, Anthony began a relationship with 18-year-old Amy Lynch, and after 3 years of living together, they married. However, their relationship quickly took a dark turn. By the time Shore was 36 in 1999, Amy began experiencing physical intimidation from her husband. She would later recount a terrifying incident in which she believed Shore intended to kill her. In a desperate moment, Amy faked passing out, a quick-thinking move that she felt saved her life. That same year, Shore met Pauline Cody, and they started dating, adding further complexity to his already troubled personal life. Anthony was the father of 2 daughters, but sadly, like many violent offenders, he struggled to be a responsible or caring parent. Troublingly, he began to develop inappropriate feelings towards his daughters, which only deepened the darkness of his character. This behavior further underscored the disturbing part he was on. Interestingly, Anthony was often described as quiet and reserved, which seemed to contrast sharply with the darker side of his life. He was also noted for being good-looking, a trait that perhaps helped him mask the unsettling behaviors. Shore's first confirmed victim was a 15-year-old girl, whose life was tragically ended on September 26, 1986. Lori was on her way to school when Shore approached her and attacked her. This marked the beginning of a series of brutal crimes that would claim the lives of 5 female victims, ranging in age from a young 9-year-old child to 20-year-old young adult woman. In all of these cases, Shore targeted strangers, individuals he had no prior relationship with. This type of crime, known as stranger murder, involves no previous connection between the perpetrator and the victim, making the crime more difficult to predict and often more terrifying for the community. Anthony's crimes were largely opportunistic in nature, meaning that he often seized the moment without much premeditation. This type of impulsive behavior is a hallmark of disorganized killers, those who lack a clear plan but act out of a need to fulfill their darker impulses. His actions appeared chaotic and unpredictable, leaving behind erratic crime scenes that reflected the inner turmoil that fueled his attacks. The lack of structure in his approach suggests a mind driven by immediate gratification rather than careful planning or precision. In understanding the motivations behind his actions, it's clear that Anthony's crimes could be classified under the disorganized lust category. This style of crime further emphasizes his impulsive and chaotic nature, driven by a primal urge to satisfy a dangerous mix of sexual obsession and control. Like many offenders of this kind, Anthony's crimes were driven by an erotic motive. His violent acts were deeply intertwined with a need for physical and sexual dominance, which became the primary driving force behind his attacks. The gratification he sought was not merely through power and control, but through an intense, distorted need to fulfill his violent desires. His actions were not born out of any delusion that his victims desired him, but rather out of his own internal compulsion to assert control and satisfy his dark impulses. This mix of violence and lust defined his motivations and characterized the horrific nature of his crimes. Anthony Allen Shore earned the nickname the Tourniquet Killer due to a specific method he used to murder his victims. Shore would employ a ligature, tightening it with an improvised tool, either a toothbrush or a bamboo stick. This made his technique resemble a garrote, but with a disturbing twist. He could control the pressure, tightening or loosening it at will. The device operated similarly to a twitch, a tool historically used by farmers to manage horses. This cruel method allowed Shore to exert precise control over his victims, which became a signature of his brutal crimes. In the case of Anthony Allen Shore's crimes, the location where he committed his murders and disposed of the bodies were often places like streets, backlots, or alleyways. He showed a complete disregard for the victims by dumping their bodies carelessly, sometimes leaving them by a dumpster or wherever they fell after the attack. This method of body disposal is a significant detail in criminal profiling, offering important insights into the perpetrator's mindset and their perception of the victims. One of the most telling aspects of criminal profiling is how a killer handles the body after committing the crime. The way a perpetrator disposes of the body can reveal their emotional connection, or lack thereof, to the victims. For instance, if a perpetrator takes the time to clean or position the body in a peaceful manner, this can indicate some level of remorse or guilt, suggesting that they may have conflicting feelings about what they've done. In contrast, someone who discards a body without any concern for how it is found likely harbors little to no regard for their victims as individuals. In the case of Shore, leaving the bodies in such a careless and exposed manner illustrates his complete lack of empathy and the objectification of his victims. Additionally, the manner in which Shore left his victims where they fell without any significant attempt to cover his tracks points to a sense of superiority and the belief that he would never be caught. This behavior indicates disorganization in his methods, showing that while his killings were deliberate, they lacked careful planning when it comes to concealment. Profilers often analyze these details to understand the psychological state of the perpetrator and what they believe they could get away with, and in Shore's case, the evidence suggests both arrogance and a deep disregard for human life. Anthony Allen Shore was finally arrested in 2003 after DNA evidence from one of his victims directly linked him to the crime. He confessed to 4 murders and attempted to take his own life while in jail. Shore was one of the few inmates who actively pursued the death penalty during his trial. He was executed on January 18, 2018 at the age of 55. Leslie Allen Williams is another Cancer serial killer with an Aries moon, born on July 4, 1953 in Detroit, Michigan. His mother neglected him from a young age, leaving his grandparents to raise him. As a reminder, nearly all violent criminals experience harsh childhoods with abusive or neglectful parents. This highlights how deeply childhood experiences can influence future behavior, sometimes manifesting as extreme violence later in life. It's important to know that difficult upbringings don't justify violent or criminal actions, but they emphasize the role a nurturing home can play in preventing future problems, even for those predisposed to aggression. Here, we're also looking for astrological patterns that may indicate a higher likelihood of violent tendencies, so we can educate others to recognize these signs early and guide children in a positive direction, helping them address their challenges rather than adding to them. See, someone with Cancer Sun and Aries Moon is bound to feel inner tension, but it's up to a parent or a caregiver to spot that and help the child regulate and channel their emotions in positive ways. Will that somehow override this astrological placement? It won't, but you have to have in mind that natal astrology tells you about how likely you are to behave in a certain way. You must always remember that there is a higher and lower manifestation of every placement, and that though you can change your core self and become something that you're not, you can become the best version of you. In a sense, if you have Cancer Sun with Aries Moon, you can become Pisces Sun with Cancer Moon and somehow forgo all that a square of Cancer Sun and Aries Moon represents. You can become someone you're not, but you can become the best version of Cancer Sun with Aries Moon or any other planetary position or aspect for that matter. Someone with a Cancer Sun and Aries Moon is bound to experience inner tension. Cancer Sun with Aries Moon can bring an incredible balance of emotional depth and drive. The nurturing instincts of Cancer, combined with the boldness and energy of Aries, can lead to a person who not only feels deeply, but also takes initiative and has the courage to act on their emotions. When developed positively, this combination can result in someone who fiercely protects their loved ones and channels their passion into meaningful action. As with many serial killers, Williams's path was marred by a long history of criminal behavior that spanned decades. His interactions with law began early. He was just 17 years old when he first encountered the criminal justice system. In 1970, Williams was arrested for breaking into a home in his neighborhood, marking the beginning of a troubled relationship with the law. Over the next 20 years, he would move in and out of prison, accumulating a list of criminal offenses. One of his more serious offenses occurred in September 1983, when he was arrested for the assault of a woman in her own home. This crime resulted in a sentence of 20 years in prison, further cementing his pattern of dangerous and violent behavior. We don't know much about Leslie Allen Williams' early life, but we know that he continued his education while incarcerated. During his time in prison, he completed his high school diploma and was actively working towards an associate degree. In addition to his academic pursuits, Williams worked in the prison's factory for 5 years, contributing to institution's operations. Perhaps most notably, he participated in psychological therapy for 14 months, a factor that weighed heavily in the decision to grant him parole. His efforts to engage in rehabilitation, particularly through education and therapy, were seen as signs of reform, leading authorities to believe he had made progress in his path towards reintegration into society. This, obviously, was a mistake. Leslie Allen Williams committed his first known murder on September 14, 1991. His victim was an 18-year-old girl whom he attacked in her home in Oakland County. Williams assaulted her before taking her life. After the murder, he buried her body in a shallow grave that he had prepared beforehand, showing the calculated nature of his crime. Williams targeted teenage girls. Like other serial killers in this group, Leslie Allen Williams didn't know his victims personally. Instead, he selected them at random, either by abducting them from the streets or attacking them in their own homes. His crimes can be described as opportunistic, targeting vulnerable individuals he encountered by chance. Because he abducted his victims from public spaces, there may have been some brief communication between him and the victims before he committed the abductions. Despite the opportunistic nature of his crimes, there is evidence of premeditation, particularly in his actions of digging graves beforehand. This suggests a level of planning that points to his crimes being more organized in nature. The effort to prepare burial sites ahead of time indicates that Williams had considered his actions carefully before striking. However, it's important to recognize that while killers may have planned aspects of their crimes in advance, not everything always goes according to their intentions. Unforeseen circumstances often arise, leading to what investigators classify as a mixed crime scene, one that shows characteristics of both organized and disorganized behavior. Like almost every killer in this group, with the exception of Viktor Malyuk, Leslie Allen Williams' motives can be classified as erotomania. One particularly disturbing aspect of his crimes was the presence of necrophilia. This behavior is not observed in other Cancer Sun serial killers with Aries Moon, indicating that it likely isn't tied to this specific planetary combination. However, with further analysis of similar cases, we'll begin to see if this disturbing act is associated with a different planetary position and which one that might be. Leslie Allen Williams would often set out in his own car, using it as both a means of transportation and a location for some of his assaults. He would prowl the streets, searching for vulnerable victims, typically targeting young women. His boldness was evident in the fact that many of these abductions occurred in broad daylight, a chilling testament to his confidence in evading detection. His method was often to approach swiftly, catching his victims off guard and abducting them with little warning. However, not all of his crimes followed this pattern. In the case of two sisters he tragically murdered, the assault took place under the cover of night. His use of both day and night, as well as his car as a tool for his crimes, reflects his opportunistic yet deliberate approach to selecting and attacking his victims. Leslie Allen Williams was finally apprehended in 1992 after the attempted assault. In this incident, he targeted a woman at a cemetery, forcing her into his car with the intent to carry out another brutal attack. However, in a stroke of luck, the woman managed to escape from his grasp, an act that would ultimately lead to his downfall. Several witnesses who saw the abduction unfold quickly alerted the authorities. Thanks to their swift action and the victim's courage, Williams was arrested soon after, bringing an end to his spree of terror. Later that same year, Leslie Allen Williams was sentenced to life in prison for the murders of 4 victims. He continues to serve his sentence behind bars to this day. The last case we'll be analyzing is that of Eugene McWatters, aka the Salerno Strangler, another Cancer Sun-Aries Moon serial killer who was born in the USA. Eugene is the youngest one in the group, being born on June 28, 1978. Like most killers in this group, though not all, he dropped out of high school driven by a growing drug habit. It's important to note that when almost all killers within a specific planetary group share a particular behavior, but one does not, there could be several reasons. First, it could indicate that this behavior is not tied to the planetary position we're analyzing, but rather to other positions unique to that individual. Second, it's possible that the perpetrator did engage in the same behavior, but will lack documentation on it, likely because their case did not gain as much attention. Our approach will be as follows. If we know for certain that the perpetrator did not engage in the shared behavior, we'll consider it unrelated to the planetary position. On the other hand, if we're unsure, we'll acknowledge the likelihood that they did engage in similar behavior, though we'll refrain from drawing any definitive conclusions. Eugene McWatters struggled to secure steady employment, often taking on low-skilled labor to make a living. Like many serial killers, his criminal record was extensive. In January 1998, McWatters was arrested for aggravated battery on a teenage boy. He pleaded no contest, was convicted, and served 7 months in prison before being released on probation. His legal troubles continued in 2001 when he was arrested after injuring his girlfriend's father with a gun. However, he only served 3 months for violating his probation. In February of the following year, he faced charges for assaulting his landlord's son, but the case was dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Later that year, in November, McWatters was arrested for robbing a man and stealing his necklace, but the charge was dropped after the victim refused to cooperate and subsequently left the country. His criminal activity persisted, and 9 months later, in August 2003, McWatters was arrested again after being caught robbing a woman's car. However, once more, he was released when the victim did not cooperate with the authorities. McWatters committed his first known murder on March 24, 2004, when he brutally assaulted a 43-year-old woman. During the attack, he strangled her, ending her life in a violent encounter. Afterward, he transported her body and discarded it in a ditch filled with shallow water. In an attempt to conceal his crime, he tried to cover remains with a pile of rocks. Despite the efforts to hide the evidence, McWatters quickly became a person of interest in the case, as he had been identified as the last person seen with the victims. Surprisingly, however, despite this clear connection, the police failed to pursue him for questioning at that time, allowing him to remain free. This lack of action by the authorities tragically allowed McWatters the opportunity to continue fulfilling his violent urges. Over time, he went on to claim the lives of 3 women, whose ages ranged from 18 to 43. He had no personal connection to any of his victims. One was a jogger, another one was a homeless woman, and the third one was a sex worker. Each of these women were targeted simply because they were vulnerable and crossed his path. McWatters' crimes can be categorized as opportunistic, preying on women he encountered randomly. His method was to lure his victims with promises of drugs or alcohol, exploiting their vulnerabilities before launching his brutal attacks. He struck when he sensed an opportunity, taking advantage of their circumstances rather than following a carefully premeditated plan. His crime scenes were notably disorganized, a reflection of his impulsive nature and lack of prior planning. Like many other killers in this group, McWatters was driven by erotomania, a compulsion that shaped his actions and motivations. McWatters disposed of his victims' bodies in various ways, dumping one in a ditch, attempting to bury another one under a pile of rocks, and leaving a third in a pile of brush. These actions reveal several important aspects of his criminal behavior. Unlike some serial killers who simply abandoned their victims where they were killed, McWatters made an effort to hide the bodies, indicating a desire to cover his tracks. However, this was not an act of remorse or respect for his victims, but rather a reflection of his attempt to avoid detection and distance himself from the crimes. What stands out here is the sloppiness of his methods. His attempts at concealing the bodies were crude and ineffective, a hallmark of disorganization. Disorganized crime scenes are often chaotic, with little forethought or planning, and McWatters' efforts to hide the evidence reflect this. He didn't take the time to thoroughly plan or execute a disposal of the bodies in a methodical way, which is a stark contrast to more organized killers who might meticulously stage or hide their victims to avoid being caught. So how did he finally get caught? The story is both curious and unexpected. After committing his final murder, McWatters faced an unexpected twist. While attempting to dispose of his victim's body, he suffered a broken foot. Desperate and in pain, he sought medical treatment for the injury. Little did he know, but this seemingly unrelated hospital visit would be his undoing. Investigators, meticulously combing through evidence at the crime scene, were able to trace the injury back to McWatters, a significant clue linking him to the crime. But the injury wasn't the only factor that sealed his fate. A woman McWatters had assaulted in 2003, who had remained silent for years, bravely came forward. She identified him in a police photo lineup, proving crucial testimony that further tied him to the brutal series of crimes, though it must be noted that she later recanted this. The combination of this physical evidence and the witness statement ensured that McWatters could no longer hide. His time of evading justice was over, and this pivotal moment led to his eventual arrest and conviction. During police questioning, Eugene McWatters initially confessed to the murders, providing details about the crimes. However, he later recanted his confession, claiming that he had only confessed for attention. His defense attorneys argued that he enjoyed the attention from confessing, but they maintained that he did not commit the murders. Despite his recantation, the evidence against him was strong enough to secure his conviction. Eugene McWatters initially pleaded not guilty, but after his death sentence was overturned and the new trial was granted in 2014, he changed his plea to no contest. This led to a life sentence in place of a death penalty. He faced 2 trials, the first in 2006, where he was sentenced to death, and the second in 2015, where his plea resulted in a life sentence. Eugene McWatters is currently serving his life sentence in Florida. But before we dive into the in-depth analysis, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you noticed any recurring patterns or behaviors in these cases? What similarities stand out to you? Please share your insights in the comments below and let me know what you think about the connection between their cases and having the Sun in Cancer and Moon in Aries. How do you think this astrological combination might influence their actions? I'm curious to see what you've observed. So individuals with Cancer Sun and Aries Moon often experience intense inner conflict. Cancer is deeply emotional and protective, yet it can manifest in moodiness, possessiveness, and a tendency to retreat into defensive behaviors when threatened. Aries Moon, on the other hand, is impulsive, aggressive, and driven by raw emotion, pushing for immediate action and confrontation. The square between these two creates a constant tension between the need for emotional security and the desire for independence and dominance. On the darker side, this can lead to volatile behavior where the Cancer Sun sensitivity clashes with the Aries Moon's explosive temper, resulting in irrational outbursts, manipulative tendencies, and the lack of emotional control. The internal struggle between nurturing and needing control can, in extreme cases, manifest as destructive or even violent actions, especially when emotions are suppressed or left unchecked. However, as we examine these 6 cases more closely, it becomes clear that there are distinct and tangible similarities among individuals with Cancer Sun and Aries Moon and can be directly tied to their crimes. Interestingly, these patterns seem to emerge more in terms of victimology rather than in the actual methods or motives behind the crimes. It's important to clarify the distinction here. Victimology should not be confused with victimization. Victimology is a critical aspect of criminal profiling that focuses on analyzing the victims themselves, their backgrounds, circumstances, and the commonalities that may link them. By examining the characteristics and lives of the victims, investigators aim to uncover patterns that could provide insight into the behavior and motivations of the perpetrator. In this case, Cancer Sun Aries Moon aspect seems to influence the selection of victims, adding another layer of complexity to the criminal behavior. The victims' shared characteristics may, in part, reflect how the astrological combination shapes the psychological dynamics between the perpetrator and those they target. One of the most striking patterns observed in this group is that all of the serial killers with a Cancer Sun and Aries Moon targeted women as their victims. What also stands out is that all of these perpetrators were male. This raises an intriguing question. If we were to analyze female serial killers with the same planetary positions, would their victim profiles be different? This possibility is a significant aspect of our astrological criminal profiling, as it suggests that men and women who share the same planetary placements may exhibit different behavioral tendencies when it comes to choosing their victims. However, it's important to consider past cases we've studied, such as those involving Aries Sun with Moon in Aries or Gemini Sun serial killers with Moon in Virgo. In these cases, where female serial killers were also present, the choice of victims aligned with what is typically expected for female offenders, regardless of astrological signs. Yet even more fascinating was the fact that despite these gender differences, there were still surprising and notable similarities between the male and female killers within these groups. This highlights the complexity of how astrological placements can influence criminal behavior and suggests that while gender may shape certain aspects, the core tendencies of these signs still manifest in similar ways. In this particular group of serial killers, one fact stands out above all others. They all exclusively targeted women. Robert Nixon, assuming he was indeed the perpetrator, focused his violence on female victims, brutally assaulting them and ending their lives with a brick. Then there's Leslie Allen Williams, who similarly preyed on young women, robbing them of their innocence, their lives, and futures they could have had. Leonard Fraser followed the same path, killing only women, a pattern that was also shared by Anthony Allen Shore and Eugene McWatters. These men, despite differences in backgrounds and methods, shared one chilling commonality. They all selected women as their victims, spanning a range of ages and backgrounds. However, Viktor Malyuk stands apart from the rest. His victim pool was not limited to females. He targeted both men and women, making him the anomaly within this group. What's interesting is that Malyuk's motives were also different from the others. While all the other killers seemed to be driven by erotomania, Malyuk's motivations were rooted in jealousy and criminal enterprise. This distinction offers a crucial insight into their behavior. We can start to draw some conclusions based on this pattern. If a male serial killer with a Cancer Sun and Aries Moon is driven by erotomania, his victims are likely to be exclusively exclusively female. However, when the motive shifts, as was seen in Malyuk's case, to something like jealousy, envy, or financial gain, the killer may not be as selective about gender and could target both men and women. The subtle but significant difference in motive could be the key to understanding the victimology of these particular killers, adding another layer to our astrological criminal profiling. Now, did you also notice that every killer in this group, without exception, targeted strangers? Even Viktor Malyuk, who stands out in some other ways, did not personally know his victims. Robert Nixon, for example, certainly didn't know the women he brutally assaulted and killed with a brick. They were mere unfortunate strangers who crossed his path. Leslie Allen Williams also preyed on teenage girls he happened to spot on the street, strangers whose lives he cut short without any personal connection to them. Leonard Fraser similarly targeted women he had no prior relationship with, although there is some speculation that he may have killed someone he knew personally, his girlfriend back in the 70s, if that claim is true. Anthony Allen Shore, too, selected unknown women as his victims. Viktor Malyuk, known as the ad killer, was unique in that he found his victims through classified ads, but even he didn't know them personally before the killings. His victims were strangers, chosen for reasons unrelated to any personal history. Lastly, Eugene McWatters, like the others, selected women he had never met before. These were women he encountered for the first time mere moments before he decided to take their lives. This pattern of targeting strangers across all the cases highlights a detachment from their victims, reinforcing the idea that for these killers, their crimes were opportunistic and driven by compulsion rather than personal grievances. In reviewing the murders committed by these individuals, one of the clearest patterns is that their crimes were largely opportunistic in nature. Each killer, from Robert Nixon to Leonard Fraser, acted when the opportunity presented itself, choosing victims who were strangers, often vulnerable and unsuspecting in the moments leading up to the attack. Robert Nixon targeted women who crossed his path by chance, attacking them brutally without any prior connection. Leslie Allen Williams operated in a similar fashion, preying on teenage girl he happened to see on the street, selecting his victims based on circumstance rather than any prior relationship. Anthony Allen Shore and Eugene McWatters followed the same pattern, taking advantage of women they encountered, driven by their violent compulsions at the moment they saw an opportunity to strike. This reflects not just a lack of planning, but also the impulsive, aggressive energy of the Aries moon combined with Cancer's emotional volatility. Viktor Malyuk, however, stands apart in that his first murder was more situational than opportunistic. His initial victim was killed in a jealous rage over a personal issue, a crime that seemed to arise from a specific set of circumstances rather than sheer opportunism. But even though his first murder may appear different, it doesn't fully separate him from the larger group. His later murders still followed a more opportunistic pattern, and the internal dynamics of the Cancer Sun-Aries Moon placement can still be seen. Malyuk's impulsiveness, driven by the deep emotional insecurity and the need for control, ties him back to the same astrological traits seen in the other killers. His initial crime may have been situational, but the underlying emotional turmoil and compulsions are still connected to the same astrological factors that influence the others. As we come to the end of this deep dive into the cases of serial killers with Cancer Sun and Aries Moon, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Did you notice any patterns or similarities that stood out to you? What do you think about the connection between these cases and this astrological combination? Please share your observations in the comments below and let's start a conversation, whether it's about victimology, the motivations, or any other recurring themes that caught your attention. And if you enjoy this analysis and want to see more astrological criminal profiling, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to like the video, share it with others who might find this content intriguing, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.